You're listening to Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong, all on Georgia Radio Network.
Welcome to episode 50 of the Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong podcast. I'm Dave Roberts, and you're not. Matt Lowe is not with us today. He's still shoveling out from the snowstorm. And we have Jessica Szilagyi.
Hello, everyone.
Who is firing off stories like they're coming out of an M60.
Oh, they're going to regulate that next.
We're going to have a ban on any journalist after 2016.
Yes, and they'll call it Jessica's Law.
Don't we have one of those?
Not yet, but I don't put anything past them. I mean, we're going to get into all of it, but the ridiculousness is just...
No, Jessica's Law is banning babies from wells, right?
Is that true?
It wasn't baby Jessica in the well? I know, long before your time.
I don't know. Then we'll name it Szilagyi's Law and make everyone suffer.
Make everybody spell it.
Yes.
You might actually vote for that one. Just make sure that everybody at that point will know how to spell your name.
Yes, and then I'll break my own law, start a GoFundMe, make a huge movement, have it repealed, take it to SCOTUS, Szilagyi on SCOTUS. Szilagyi will be a household name everywhere. Great plan, Dave. Great plan.
Perfect. Well, we've got a lot to lampoon today. Former Georgia state rep and failed gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams to deliver the Democratic response to the State of the Union.
Man, this has me all kinds of irritated. First of all, was no one with a title available? I mean, I understand that a lot of Democrats are running for president, but didn't we have a Kennedy, like that Chapstick Kennedy from last year? Wasn't he the one that did it the last year or the year before? I mean, we don't, there are other congressmen or even a governor, somebody who's sitting in office, not just a lowly citizen.
Yeah, you would think we'd have a governor or somebody else. You would also think after the Republicans in Georgia tied her to Chuck and Nancy, right, and tied her to California money, and all this out of the state funding that really was an albatross around her neck. She's going to go out and do this at the invitation of Chuck U. Schumer.
So part of me feels like she's like trolling the way that Trump does, in that she's playing into the narrative or giving like Republicans something to talk about. And so she's doing playing that pawn role. And then the other part of me is legitimately irritated because I don't think ever in the history of ever has a state-level legislator, let alone a former one, been the response person. And it's not that I don't think that general people should have a role, but if I'm going to hear criticisms, if I'm going to hear somebody chastising what Republicans are doing, which I don't support a lot of what they're doing, but if I'm going to hear from them, I want it to be someone who has a seat at the table.
Well, it should be somebody who is involved in national politics, to your point, and a governor to a certain extent does, because I know that the Republicans ran Bobby Jindal up there, and one of the creepiest moments ever after a State of the Union was Bobby Jindal coming up this dark hallway as if he were a vampire. Maybe she's going to end up at the head of the DNC. She's very well spoken. She's very, from what I can tell, she's very charismatic.
And she's very smart.
Oh yeah, she's no dummy.
Right.
So her points will be well executed. And if she were governor of Georgia, it would have been a great choice. But you're right, she's a private citizen.
It just irritates the heck out of me. I mean, I just don't think that the State of the Union response should be a platform for somebody who's probably running for office, you know?
Yeah, I mean, somebody that's got not just a hopeful, but somebody, like you said, has got a seat at the table, somebody that the party is looking to run. Now, who knows? She may jump in the race. Everybody else is. The Democrats are going to have 20 people on the stage. It's going to look ridiculous when they start having their debates. No more ridiculous than the Republicans were the last cycle through, I suppose. I don't know. Like I said, I don't dislike her personally. I think this was a bad move on her part if she wants to maintain any political clout.
Well, I agree with you. She's got to take a different direction, because I think even though she really mobilized her base and kept them on the hook, like through her whole fighting the results and court battles and everything, even though she kept her base on the hook, I think she did a lot of damage, not just in Georgia, but to people who were watching, who watched it drag out for 10 days. And I think that she needs to show herself as reasonable and level-headed, and the Stacey Abrams that she was in the Democratic primary and even in the state house, like, she was a reasonable person. Again, I didn't agree with a lot of her policies, but she was very well respected among her peers, and she was obviously well respected among voters. It wasn't until she started running against Kemp that and I don't know who was advising her or what, or if it was just do whatever it takes and at all costs, but she has an opportunity here to kind of redeem herself among moderates, I think. Of course, we're already hearing like the same old jokes that we heard through the election. And I'm like, really, guys, can we not come up with something new?
What's that, on appearance?
Appearance, yeah, go back to, the Glasgow County, all that. Although I did love the one that was like, is her State of the Union going to drag out for 10 days? Like the election results did. I did appreciate that one.
That's actually pretty good. That's
legit.
Yeah, yeah. Witty criticisms are great. And that's, the best thing about your comment section on Facebook is now you've got some pretty smart people that follow you and very witty. And it's worth getting angry reading the stories that you put out just to see the comments.
Sure.
I obviously don't have a degree in political science, but my advice to somebody in her spot that just pulled what she did is go away for a little while. Mm-hmm. This working class hero shtick she's got, it just isn't working. It's just not. I mean, you can't both, I think we said the same thing about Liz Warren. You can't play this working class hero bit and portray yourself as incredibly educated. And she is, and she's very, very smart, and she's been successful. She's a published author. I mean, nothing I'm going to read because I don't read romance novels, but can't you just see me just wrapped up in front of a fire eating chocolate, reading some romance novel?
That's, I don't know if our listeners know this, but I've never met you in person, but that is exactly how I pictured you. Like a nice, double-sided reversible throw and a warm cup of tea and just novel after novel. That's the Dave Roberts I envision.
I just need a good cry.
Oh, Lord. Where were we?
Let's Bob Luddy. He owns a kitchen ventilation company called Captive Air. Has taken his libertarian business sense and gone into education. This is a story that you shared with us, Jessica, and it is very encouraging. Kind of the way he looks at education. His academies are called Thales. And before I actually watched the video on it, I was pronouncing it like the British do the Thames River. And I'm glad I watched it before I got on here and started pronouncing it the Thames University.
What is the correct pronunciation?
Thales.
Oh.
Thales, according to the video.
Libertarians, I swear.
They can't. They got to do everything just a little off.
But seriously, the idea is brilliant, and some of the people who commented on the article, like in different places that it was shared, criticized it and said, like having a new college is a problem for employers, and not everyone's going to recognize it, and this, that, and the other. First of all, I will say, I didn't always go the traditional route. And I had a resume, of course, when I applied for jobs, but has anyone ever been challenged on their education or said, is this a real school? I know that when you're competing to be like an attorney with JP Morgan or something like that, they're going to say, where did you go to law school? Or you're going to want to have like a certain caliber of recommendations. But for an entrepreneur or someone who's just trying to get like a little bit more education, I don't see why something like this would be a problem.
You know what? Even if you're going to a law firm, they don't care. Did you pass the bar? You have a degree? Okay. And obviously, that's a certification level that you'd have to be accredited to do that. What I found really interesting, because, I've already ruined my chance of running for school board because I'd like to see most public schools go away, is he's educating kids at his academies at a cost of $6,000 for middle school and high school and about $5,300 for elementary school. The school system spends $9,000 per student to educate him.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Sorry, I'm being me.
No, I was just going to say, like, the private college totally excited me, but reading the article, which we'll post on Reason, giving the background of this guy and like what he's done for education is, I think, what's amazing. I think they said that when like you're enrolling in pre-K, there's 4 people waiting for every 1 spot.
Yes. It is a totally achievable amount of money that a working family can afford to send their kid. Now, if you've got, 15 kids like Matt, it starts to add up.
I'm sure they offer discounts, like get the 10th free or something.
The Costco model. Oh, oddly enough, that's something that I did see, which was a paradigm shift. Speaking of the Costco model, is their class sizes are larger, but they're grouped by ability. Mm-hmm. So, every school wants to brag about having small class sizes, but if you have 40 kids in a classroom and they all are more or less at the same level, that really isn't a problem. You've got kids who can help each other and they're moving along. It is worth noting, he is not in the business of feeding the kids. You bring your own lunch. There's no lunchroom, so there's no lunch ladies to pay. They only accept kids, and I think where I read it was the 60th percentile.
Yes, I was
or better.
Bring that up because I think that that's telling too that it's not just some pie in the sky like exclusive school. Like it's attainable for economically attainable and educationally. Like you don't have to be the best and brightest to go to a school that aligns with your family's values.
Right, and that's the thing is he's not taking on special education. He's not taking on sports. He's in the business of education. He's not in the business of putting out a football team. He's not in the business of putting anything. I think they may have a chess team or something that's out of parents' pockets, but he is in the business of teaching. And I know teachers are going to hate to hear this. He is less concerned with certifications than he is with results. If you can teach mathematics, he doesn't care if you've got a state certification.
And he doesn't care if you publish anything to a journal. It's about every student gets one-on-one time, at least an hour every week with their teacher. And they put the lessons and any lectures online, so you can watch them as many times as you want, and it's just readily available. I mean, it's brilliant.
Oh yeah, at the college level, yeah, absolutely. You're merging the idea of getting an online degree with the ability to go, and it's technically a commuter school, but you get a chance to sit down with your professor. And this is a guy who's been innovative, in his career. And in his interview, he said he ran for school board and lost, and is glad he did, because if he was within the system, there's no way he could have affected these changes.
Right.
I'm very, very impressed, and of course, being an HVAC guy, makes him much smarter and more capable. But it's a great program. Anybody who says, well, what would we do if public schools went away? Well, here you go. There's most working families can afford this.
Totally.
And so if he wasn't the only one doing it, and competition came in, and schools were instead of having a waiting list for every spot that comes open, you have schools that have to go out and compete to get parents to bring their kids to them. Prices go down. There is no bad downside to privatizing education. Most things have a higher quality in the private sector. I think you and I agree that most things should be private. Prisons should be run by the state, because the onus should be on them if they're going to deprive someone of freedom. And after listening to your podcast, the probation system, the law enforcement should be publicly funded. But outside of that, private industry does it better.
That's right.
Like the meeting I was sitting in, where somebody simultaneously griped about his taxes going up and teacher pay. Like, well, where do you think that money comes from? It's magic. It's magic.
It's magic. That's right. I don't know. I hope it is wildly successful, and I hope that, it obviously, I'm not minimizing how much effort and work he's put into this, but the way that it's laid out, like he doesn't make it seem like it was just so many hurdles that were too hard to overcome to do this. So I hope that other people do this as well, like-minded people.
Well, and he gets away from the political correctness that grips our schools now. So yeah, we're going to group kids by ability. Everybody does better when you can move the same pace. When you can only move as fast as the slowest man, everybody has to move at that speed. So when you've got public schools that have to pretend that kids aren't different, that kids don't learn differently, it would be unfair for, I hate running. I hated it every day when I had to do it for a living. But when I was doing that, we had running groups by ability. Our overall goal for all of us was to get better. But if you take somebody who runs a 5-minute mile and puts them with me and says, you have to run with this guy, he's never going to get better. And the same thing goes for learning.
Right.
People love to say, well, how are other countries beating us? Well, they cull the herd. When you have with education, is they find the kids that aren't cutting it and they're gone. Now, I'm not proposing we start throwing kids on the scrap pile, but when you ask yourself, well, why are we getting behind in math and science? It's not because the teachers are bad. It's because the process is flawed. And my sister-in-law, who is a teacher, loves when she hears the AC guy opine on education.
Well, we're once again in the position where we're talking about how children need to be educated, and neither one of us have children. But the premise is the same, because it's what how life works. Like you don't treat everyone the same and apply a one size fits all approach to teach someone to do something. I mean, people have different learning styles. So many things go into it. So we should spend an entire episode on education.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I got the a-hole label on me today from a comment that I put on one of the members of the school boards out here talking about bullying and mental health. And I said the school should do less to end bullying. Stay out of it. Teach. Stay in your lane, bro.
Get back in your box.
Get back in your box.
No, I agree with you, though. I saw that article, and I think the article is worth sharing because I would like to know what some of our libertarian and non-libertarian people think of it. But it was a really interesting article that harped on wraparound services and using the school system as a jumping off place to have, economic development and recruit places to come to the county. And I just was reading it, scrolling through the article, like, are we really having this conversation? Like, we're talking about how wraparound services aren't sufficient, which if people don't know, wraparound services are extra services outside of schooling, like mental health and dental programs and counseling services and all different kinds of things that aren't within the regular day-to-day that not all children get. But we were talking about in this article about how that's no longer enough. Already doing what parents should be doing and families should be doing is not sufficient. So we need to do more. I mean, it was blowing my mind.
And the thing is it's people that have an R after their name that are proposing it. And some that have a L after their name. The Republicans no longer represent the party of limited government, because all that should be appalling to anybody that you're gonna hand your kids over to the state. They're gonna feed them, they're gonna educate them, they're gonna the individual parenting is completely advocated to the state. And we wonder how we get statists.
And the answer will continue to be it's never going to be enough. Like if dental and mental health and ensuring that they have haircuts and vision care and things that some adults don't even have when they have jobs, if that's not enough, what will be enough? Ensuring they have a home.
Exactly. They're going to send somebody to your house every night to make sure your kid does their homework. This goes right back to the Thales Academies. He's gotten out of all that stuff. There's no football team, there's no baseball team, there's no ancillary products. You come here, we educate you, and you pay us for it. And I can't think of, for $500 a month. And I can't think of a more pure educational system than pay the teacher, teach my kid, and send him home to me for learning values and everything else.
And by default, it's going to make for better parents because the parents are going to have to step in.
As is their job.
Right.
Was it Chris Rock when I was talking about wanting credit for stuff you're supposed to do? Because I take care of my kids. What do you want, a cookie? You're supposed to. These opinions are ours and not those of All on Georgia. If you like our opinions, you can go back and listen to other episodes on any of your podcast platforms. And while you're on those platforms, if you wouldn't just give us all the stars. If 4 is the best, give us 4. If 5 is the best, give us 5. And interact with us on social media. Send us messages to saying Dave's an idiot, get him off the show, or boy, it was so much better without Matt Lowe. Okay, here's a scary one because the first word I'm going to use in this one. Bipartisan group at the state house looks to force car insurance companies to treat, this gets a little convoluted, 18 to 24-year-old active duty service members as if they were 25 plus.
I can't even handle it. I can't. First of all, whose dumbass idea was it? I can't even formulate like full thoughts on this bill. It's not even the worst of the worst, but it is in its own way, because our legislators complain about how the federal government is so bad about mandating things on private companies, and the war on small business and the war on businesses in general, and the war on the individual, and mandate is so wrong and it's unconstitutional. And then they come in and swoop in with this bipartisan bill that's sponsored by chairmen and long-serving legislators and white men and black men. And they say, we're going to require that private insurance companies offer reduced premiums for active duty military. Mm-mm-mm. Mm-mm.
And look, the chairman of the insurance committee in the House is a co-sponsor. Was that Richard Smith?
Yes.
It's going to pass. I mean, he owns the committee.
Of course it's going to pass. And Ron Stevens, and Jesse Petrie are influential. Like, they have a nice handle on votes.
I mean, look, the only hope that we have is that these insurance companies own enough of the state senators to get this to die in committee.
You know what's crazy is that we have a lot of insurance agents in the legislature. We have a lot of people who work for State Farm and different companies that serve in our legislature. I can't even believe, because this is going to drive up costs for everyone else.
What's going to happen? And I called somebody who owns an Allstate just to run this by him. He hadn't heard about it yet, but he said he will, because they get legislative updates and stuff.
Hold on, time out. If they followed allongeorgia.com, they would have up to the minute updates, but that's okay. They can wait for their lobbying groups to send them some information. That's okay. Allongeorgia.com for the rest of you.
or the one of his customers to call him up on his cell phone after hours to ask him about it.
Love it. So
they're just gonna take a risk pool and go 18 to 30. It's gonna cost those 25 to 30 money, because they're just gonna have to raise everybody's rates. All right. Joe at 18 is still an 18-year-old. So his risk, just because he wears green, is not any lower than a risk of an 18-year-old that works job in construction. There's a reason they have those risk pools, and there's a reason that 18 to 24-year-olds have a higher rate. That's just the way it is. No industry uses statistics like insurance does, and actuaries and everything else. If being a member of the military puts you in a different risk pool, then they would pay differently. It doesn't.
We had a commenter on our site talking about how, well, if these people are willing to put their lives on the line to help people and protect people, then I'm all for them having lower rates. Well, what about law enforcement? I mean, I could make the same argument. You're creating a special class of people, and your justification is that they put their lives on the line. Of course, I respect that, and I always will. But that doesn't mean that you should require a private entity to do something to reward them.
No, and I absolutely agree with you on that. Sure, cops, firefighters, garbage men, they provide an essential service to our country. Plumbers, AC guys. Look, it's not, and we're going to, and most of the listeners to this podcast are going to feel the same way. It's not the role of government. It just isn't to go in and tell an insurance company what rates they can charge to whom based on their employment status. And what my insurance guy says, where do we stop that? Where's that equal protection? Because we can't give you a different rate based on your sexual orientation, any other special interest groups that they get. We can't do that. We have to treat everybody that hit these criteria the same. And this is a law specifically telling them not to.
Well, and I know this is not directly related, but I think it's worth noting. Like you think about hospital rates, and I know that we're not talking about health insurance; we're talking about hospital rates. But there are things in place that say you can't upfront charge different rates to different people, that you have to start at the same threshold. And then if there's cash payments and things like that, you can write off some of the cost, or with Medicaid, obviously, but you have to charge the same. So in one industry, we're saying that everyone is equal, and in another, we're saying they're not. I mean, it's insane.
It pushes the buttons for the legislators to. I think you hit the nail on the head on either the comments in the article that you dropped on it or on your personal page. With it sure does look good on a mailer, and that's what these things are. I don't think there's a huge appreciable difference between a 20-year-old and a 25-year-old on insurance. I mean, I remember being pretty disappointed when I turned 25. Like,
Absolutely.
It was like $30 every 6 months. I'm like, really? So it's not a big enough problem.
I also have a hard time believing that some 18 to 25-year-old, given how ridiculous that generation is as a whole, I have a hard time believing that they contacted their legislator to say, you know what, I think I need lower insurance rates. Can you do something about this? Really?
Most couldn't pick their legislator out in a lineup.
Yeah, I don't believe this is a problem that we're solving, or that it's a constituent service thing. I just don't buy it.
It's not. It's not. It has everything to do with looking good. And it's going to fly through the House. The only hope that we have is that Duncan squashes it or it dies in committee. But if he wants that mailer and he wants to, have that flag pin and say, look how we support the troops, it'd be so much better getting government out of the way of these families. And Army families, military families they're working families like everybody else. Well,
and we haven't even covered all of them. I think this is the second one we've covered with veterans so far, but there are a lot of veteran-oriented bills this session, and so there's clearly, and it seems to be the same few people, at least the same 3 people that are on all of them. So there's obviously an effort to address this, but are they even addressing problems that veterans care about? I mean, that's me genuinely asking, because I'm not a veteran and I'm not married to a veteran. I don't have a veteran in my immediate family that could tell me these are the things that are hurting us right now. But it doesn't seem like we're actually addressing those things.
And I don't know what magic bill that could come out of the legislature that would make me go stand up and cheer. Well, sure, yeah. Getting rid of income tax, not going to happen. But yeah, outside of freedom increasing and tax decreasing bills that would come out, there's nothing that really. If I were still a troop, I would be, oh, thank God for the General Assembly. That's just there. I don't see any of it that would really affect, a veteran or, an active duty or anybody like that. Now, it's worth noting this bill only applies to active duty. It and it does apply to AGR, active Guard and Reserve, folks that Guard and Reservists that go to work every day as a full-time employee. They're not a true drilling reservist. They are full-time employees. It applies to them or anybody who's on long-term orders. Oh, what a mess. Long-term orders would be a reservist who goes to a school and say that school is 9 months. He would then take a piece of paper, go fax it in, or, well, because I'm from the 19th century, fax it in or email it or whatever over to his insurance company. They would have to change his rate for 9 months while he's on active orders, and then change the rate back when he goes back to being a drilling reservist. That doesn't sound cumbersome at all.
It's a short bill, and it's still terrible.
As somebody who has worked on the inside, how to phrase this politely, is it a dumpster where they can put a bunch of other crap and pass it and call it, the Veteran Relief Act or Veteran Insurance Relief Act, and cram a bunch of other crap in it in committee and sneak that stuff through under with a veteran tag on the bill?
I think that we're going to see a consolidation of veterans bills, and like with the tax exemption, and there's one on letting them out of civil contracts and some other things. I think we'll see all of those consolidated. Yes, they do use them as vehicles. There's two options, which what you suggested, I honestly think is like the least likely to happen. What they could do is, put all this veteran stuff in it and then attach some garbage that is not veteran related and on the Senate side, or when the Senate sends it back, or one of the two. They could do that. I don't see them doing that. What I see them do is, if in this bill, if you go to and search it on the House website right now, it says the title, it's about veterans benefits, blah, blah, blah. What they do is they send it to committee, or in the Senate, they take out all of the language and leave it nothing to do with veterans and replace it with a tax exemption for, Mercedes-Benz or an insurance company or something else. And so then when someone goes to search the site, they don't see that it's about that. They see that it's about veterans, and they might skim by it. I've seen that happen on more than one occasion, and it makes me freaking furious because, you wouldn't know if you read that bill once, you would never know that the language is entirely different unless you read it again.
Right. And look, and you kind of touched on the getting out of contracts with the storage places. It is already law, and it's already well practiced. If you're on a lease and you are transferred, or if you're a reservist and you get called up, you're going to be deployed somewhere or something else, you're already allowed out of your lease.
So that one you're talking about, I don't know, you may know the answer to this, because someone mentioned that there's a federal law that allows this, but the bill is specifically for gyms and satellite companies and streaming services. Is that a problem? Are companies really jerks to military members trying to get out of contracts?
Maybe gyms. Here's the thing. I don't know. Streaming services didn't exist the last time I was in uniform. I don't think so. I really don't think so. It would have to be something fairly specific, like some mom and pop. But again, if we're going to say that these members are grown boys and girls, they make their decisions, would you go and you sign up for something like a gym membership? Is how do I get out of it? If I'm deployed, how do I get out of it? If I'm transferred, how do I get out of it? And I can't imagine. I mean, the court of public opinion on that, if the social media lynch mob would go out, lose their minds. It's more legislation that members can sign off on and say, look what I'm doing. And I'm sorry, we kind of veered off on that one, but it kind of it ties in. And I don't like our soldiers, sailors, and airmen being used as mascots. I use those three. I didn't mention Marines because they belong to the Navy. Crayon eaters. But so, yeah, and we can move on. I think we beat it well to death that I don't think anybody listening to this is surprised that you and I don't like creating a separate class of citizen. A bill filed in Georgia would prohibit carry licenses for those with disability without psychiatric approval. Oh Lord!
This is some bull beep.
So, and tying in with the last story, this would prohibit Marines from operating in the state of Georgia.
This bill, I saw the headline for it. I read it, and then of course, like all good legislation does, you read the language, and it refers you to a code section. So then you have to leave the bill and go search that code section to find out what it's really about. And so this bill says, all of the language pertains to someone with a disability as defined and it cites the code section. So I Googled that code section, and it defines disability as someone with a mental or emotional illness, which emotional illness is a little bit undefined, but you can at least see where they're going with the bill. But then it says that it's someone with a developmental disability or an addictive disease. Well, developmental disabilities are like the most broad category ever. I mean, it includes dyslexia, ADHD, autism, hearing problems, speech problems, blindness, like not even legally blind, like just vision problems, developmental disabilities, and then addictive diseases. I mean, caffeine, smoking, those are all addictions. Addicted to porn. I mean, you go.
And here's the thing, is nobody wants a crazy person running around with a gun. I mean, we all agree that if we could put crazy in a box and say this person is criminally insane, say, okay, let's lock that person up and keep them away from society. This is where, the NRA and I differ. If you are operating in a free society, you have to be afforded all the rights that come with being in a free society. So I don't even support the list of prohibited persons as it is. The same standard to remove your Second Amendment right should be applied to that and your right to vote. If you're just too mentally incapacitated to carry a gun, you shouldn't be allowed at the ballot box.
I agree. And I think there's some other dangerous parts to this bill. I mean, this is bad enough with the disabilities, but, our gun laws are already not good. Like, they're not in the place of individual liberty and freedom and shall not be infringed. And now, if you've been in a mental institution for anytime in the last 5 years, you cannot own a weapon, but a probate judge can speak with like a superintendent of the facility, and they can make recommendations because, they do allow people with alcohol problems or even drug problems in a different form or fashion. So anyway, that's what the current law is. Well, that's a 5-year look back. This bill eliminates all of that language, sets a 10-year look back. So if you have been diagnosed with a disability or addiction or depression or any type of mental issue in the last 10 years, not been in a facility, but just diagnosed, you can't have a carry permit and you can't buy a gun.
Right.
Without a psychiatrist vouching for you. That is complete and utter bullshit.
And you want to know why so many veterans have undiagnosed mental problems? Because they're afraid to go get diagnosed. You're going to use this. You're going to take somebody who may be struggling with, adjusting coming back, and they go to the VA for help, and the first thing they do is hang a label on him. And now he's been diagnosed. In the next decade, he's got to go ask Mother May I. So you've got to find a physician whose politics aren't anti-gun to say, and willing to stick his neck out professionally and say, yes, that person's stable enough to own a gun, you're not going to find anybody with the first place they're going to go if God forbid something did happen is how did he end up with a gun and what psychologist signed off on it. It's going to be a huge case of CYA for any physician to go out and sign off on it.
Sure, and I mean I hate to generalize, but the mental health profession leans liberal for a number of reasons, and some of them are justifiable. But if they're not, at least objective to the Second Amendment, if they are anti-Second Amendment, why would they vouch for somebody's rights? And my rights should not depend on someone else's opinions, not ever.
Right. If I am such a danger, take me off the street. Mm-hmm. This is one of those, and this goes into a much larger conversation about mental health, that one flew over the cuckoo's nest did more damage to the mental health in this country than any single event. When they started shutting down the state hospitals and putting people back on the street and putting in restrictive laws is why we have the problems that we do, why we have worried about, people that should be locked up. But they should be in an institution walking around. We could be focusing on them and getting them treatment, but instead we're going to focus on controlling everybody else's rights. Because, like you said, developmental disability. You're saying because somebody has an 80 IQ, which is I think the line for being functional. Well, he's a little slow in the uptake, but a good-hearted person. Well, you can't have a gun. Yeah.
Someone who reads backwards is not a danger to themselves or anybody else. Someone who's deaf is not a danger to themselves or anybody else.
Well, they are to the podcast unless we get them transcribed. You're right. And an addictive disease. Well, if you're an alcoholic, you never say, I was an alcoholic. Even when you're on the 12th step, you say, I'm an alcoholic and I have a disease and I can't control it, therefore I don't drink. It's one of those jokes. And you're an alcoholic. No, they go to meetings. I'm a drunk. So you're going to take everybody who's in AA and say none of you can own a gun because you have an addiction, even though you don't feed it anymore. You could give up your 10-year chip tomorrow. So you can't you have lost the fundamental human right of self-defense. It's amazing to me. Now I don't see this passing.
A lot of people say that. And my thing is this. The language that said you cannot have a carry permit in the state of Georgia if you have been voluntarily or involuntarily committed in the last 5 years, that came under Republicans. That is not that far from where this is. And no, I don't think it's going to happen this year. And I do believe that Kemp is a better protector of the Second Amendment than Nathan Deal ever was or ever could be. But this isn't that far-fetched.
It's not. I don't think it'll go that way just because of who's floating the bill out. That's the biggest thing.
Sure.
But you're right. If you change a little bit of the wording in here and you tag an R on it, it might fly through.
It's horrifying. It's offensive. The bill itself is offensive to me. And I don't get offended very easily.
Yeah, well, the developmental disability, and you brought up a good one with, you can have a reading disability. I mean, there are so many, if you get nailed with ADHD at 18 years old, you're saying for 10 years till you're 28, you can't own a firearm. And people won't go in for treatment. It's, some people need help. And that's what mental health professionals and addiction professionals are there for. If you de-incentivize going for help, what do you get? You get people that still have an illness that are afraid to get to seek help because they know, I'm going to lose fundamental rights if I do that.
And I'll stop piling on here, but one of two things happened. Either one, they didn't look up the definition of disability before they put that in the bill, or two, they looked it up and they still put it in the bill. Either way, it's wrong. The bill is just garbage. And, our legislative council in both chambers does not tell someone when a bill is unconstitutional. They do not give legal advice. They do not say when you can or cannot do something or you're harming a certain class of people, because they allow the legislators to craft whatever kind of legislation they want and bring it to the floor. Sometimes I wish that wasn't the case. No, I don't want a barrier to entry for my representatives and my senators to do what their constituents want. But for the love of God, you are basic freedoms you're trying to chip away at. There should be a punishment for that.
Well, there used to be, is you wouldn't get reelected.
Right.
I don't know. It's chest pounding. They can go back to their constituents and say, I've tried to keep guns out of crazy people's hands, because that's how they're gonna say it. So they can go back and say, I did my part to keep guns out of hands of people who shouldn't have them, but those evil Republicans. And this is not a R versus D, because both sides do it. Both sides drop bills they know aren't going to go anywhere. Just then go back to their constituents and wave it around and say, look what a great person I am.
Right.
Speaking of legislatures, this is not Georgia, but it's kind of, it's certainly gun related. I didn't realize this. Baltimore schools don't allow police officers to carry firearms. And I'm not talking about
in the schools.
And I'm talking about resource officers, while the kids are there, have to go and put their guns in a box.
And it's worth noting that Baltimore's school system has its own independent police force. This isn't the city of Baltimore that sends, like we do with a lot of our systems, where they send a city officer or a sheriff's deputy to be the school resource officer. This is an independent school force.
Right.
They're charged with protecting the schools, and they don't carry guns.
Allegedly specially trained for this task. This is all they do. It is just like in Atlanta we have MARTA cops that are specific to MARTA. These are police officers that are tasked specifically, their entire chain of command, with keeping kids safe. So the Maryland legislature was going to pass a bill, or looking at passing a bill, that would allow firearms back into the schools. And again, these are specifically for these school district police officers. And the school district unanimously voted against recommending it. And they let a bunch of kids take over the meeting, screaming that they don't want guns in their school.
It's not a simple concept to understand, because I read an article or two on it, and I had to read them multiple times to understand what actually happened, because it seems outrageous.
What, the kids creating a phalanx?
Well, the fact that this is the law, that the state legislature is trying to change it, and then that the school board is passing a resolution to disapprove of a proposed law.
Right, and that at the state level, they would say, well, we can't pass a bill if they don't want it. Which I wish they applied to other stuff.
Right.
If we could just say, no thanks. Now, look, this was obviously coordinated by adults, having the kids in there taking over the meeting, because most of these kids didn't know what a phalanx was. I mean, unless the standards in education and Maryland are so much higher. And these kids, first of all, they're kids. And I don't know why we're listening to children on this stuff. They don't want to be policed. They say that and they go back to the old nugget of, police officers are racist because the majority of the arrests in the school system are black kids, I think is what it is. Or it's that they're low percentage of arresting of white students or whatever. But that really has nothing to do with the argument. It's a ridiculous argument to make. Because they're not saying none of the kids arrested committed a crime. They're just saying we need to disarm our police force. And then they throw out, in the case of an emergency, another gun would not be helpful. No, it really is helpful. Like an active shooter shoots a whole lot less once he's dead, because he becomes inactive. It is scary to me that we're letting students steer this. That a school board is disarming trained police officers, and that the state government is too afraid to do anything about it. It's a foreign concept to me that it goes to like schools being a prison. What do? The police officer walks to the office and takes off his gun and slides it in as if he were going into a prison to interview an inmate.
I just feel like all that we can do is just take a lot of deep breaths in and a lot of deep breaths out, because what the hell?
And this is what happens when we vilify an object.
That's right.
It's a tool.
And they're law enforcement officers, for the love of Pete. Right.
If you're not going to stand on the Second Amendment part of it and say, hey, listen, it's a building like any other, and a citizen should have the ability to defend himself in a school just like anywhere else. If you want to take that argument and throw it away, you fall back on these are law enforcement professionals specifically trained to operate in schools. I don't know how we got here. And Jessica, to your point, it is, when we look at the gun laws in Georgia and where they're going is, 50 years ago, the whole idea would have been absurd in Maryland too.
We would have laughed at all of this. Like, oh my gosh, can you imagine?
Yeah, can you imagine taking away Barney Fife's pistol?
Yeah, I was about to say, I watched Tombstone recently, and I almost came off the couch when the police chief was like, "Oh, you can have a gun, you just can't carry it in Tombstone." I was like, "What?" Oh,
Sam Elliott. Yes, we're not saying you can't own a gun. We're not saying you can't carry a gun. All we're saying is you can't carry a gun in town.
Yeah, I was ready to light my torch and go, mm-mm-mm. But I mean, it seems so ridiculous, but we're dealing with that kind of stuff everywhere.
We are, and it's an all-out assault. And I know that sounds like a hyperbole, but there is a concerted effort, and whether it's the Brady folks or the Gifford folks that are the every other group, that there's a concerted effort to spend money in these states, and especially in state legislatures, because they know they're not getting anything through Congress. They're just not. Congress is so broken, you couldn't get a good bill through. But if they can go to every one of these state houses and push this stuff through.
Well, on that note.
On that cheery note.
That's all we have.
Closing thoughts.
Everything is awful and everyone sucks. That's my January to April 3rd mantra every year, so I'm going to stick to it.
Please remember that our state legislature, the Georgia Assembly, is in session. Keep your eyes out. Stay subscribed to All on Georgia. Follow Jessica. Watch these bills as they come out and communicate with your lawmakers, because when they think they're insulated up there is when they make really selfish and poor decisions.
They bank on us not knowing.
Oh, yeah, they do. Anyway, for Matt Lowe, Jessica Szilagyi, I'm Dave Roberts. Thanks for listening.